All right, Shabbos, say good morning, or good tavach. Such a schos Baruch Hashem to begin another week of learning together. Let's begin by thanking all of our sponsors. So thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev. Josh and Becker Friedman for dedicating all the Sherman Joshua this month in creation of the yard site of Josh's father, Yisrael Yehuda ben Rav Chaim Rafael, as well as for the safe return of all of our hostages, for our precious soldiers, and Aliyah for the neshama of all of those Kiddush Hashem on Simchas Torah. Semi and Malka Esterson in memory of their parents, Hinda Bas Hanech Ephraim, Yitzchak Lev ben Aaron HaKohen, and Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram. The Pepper family in memory of their brother and uncle, Yosef Pepper, Yosef David ben Yaakov, and, one second, the Steinmetz family. The Steinmetz family, Alan and Allison Steinmetz and family, for dedicating the daf in honor of Mr. Steinmetz's birthday, Baruch Hashem, today, Sunday, November 26th. Adam, where's Adam? Good, how old?
35.
35, incredible, right? Incredible that your father's 35, that's fantastic. Mamish, Kislev is the month of miracles, so Baruch Hashem, incredible, good, we don't ask, fantastic. And in honor of Adam's brother Jason, who began Yevamis on Daf Beis, and Baruch Hashem is part of our virtual shir every single day, and was zoche Baruch Hashem to complete Seder Nashim. Incredible. So a mazel tov to Mr. Steinmetz, a mazel tov to Jason Steinmetz, and Baruch Hashem, the Steinmetz Mishpacha should continue to celebrate incredible milestones of learning for many, many years to come. Amen. One more thank you, a very special thank. Sorry, jumping between WhatsApps over here. Okay. And a thank you very much to Elio and Devora Rabenfar for dedicating the pastries this morning in memory of Elio's grandmother, Zaman Bas Yosef. We hope that in the merit of the brachas, the neshama will have an aliyah and the family in Nechama. Well, so with that, let us begin. Incredible. I'm sorry? Okay, good. I'm gonna get to that. I'm gonna get to that in a little bit. Emir Hashem. Good. So I'll say. So let's begin Emir Hashem on. Let's begin Emir Hashem on Daf Chavdal. Today is Daf 24. We are picking up Emir Hashem on Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis at the Mishnah. So I'll say. So remember again, we say the following: Ezu Tam beEzu Muad. Ultimately, again, what is a tam and what is a muad? So we'll say, so it's actually interesting that now after going through everything, Emir Hashem, now we kind of get back to some basic definitions about things. So what is a tam and what is a muad? Muad, kol she'idu bo shloshi yamim. Ultimately, again, so a muad halacha l'maisa, is any situation, any time where the animal has been warned 3 times. Now we'll say one of the things we're going to talk about is halacha l'maisa, is the warning for the animal or is the warning for the owner? We're going to talk about that in greater depth a little bit later on. So again, kol she'idu bo shloshi yamim. So ultimately, so what is, okay, let me take a step back. So this is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda's understanding that the way that a muad works is there are 3 consecutive days of warning, or it doesn't have to be consecutive, but 3 days of warning. The animal is warned on 3 different times because the animal has gored someone else. And when does it become a tam? It becomes a tam after it hasn't gored for 3 days. Now we'll say, now let's talk about this for just a moment. So Rashi points out there is something very interesting. What does it mean that it hasn't gored for 3 days, and therefore again now it's a tam? So Rashi says, Sheroa shvarim ve'eno nogea chozer l'tamuso. So Rashi says something very interesting, that if there are 3 days in which it is provoked, but does not respond to provocation, then ultimately it returns back to its tam status. Right, see here what happens over here? It becomes a muad if it gores on 3 days, and it becomes a tam if it's provoked on 3 days and doesn't respond. We'll say, which is actually very interesting. We'll say that you could be a muad and then return back to a tam, which shows you that what? If tshuva is possible for a shar, then al achas kama v'kama, how possible tshuva is for us. If a shar could change, I certainly could change. This is Rabbi Yehuda. So that's Rabbi, first opinion. Rabbi Meir says no. Rabbi Meir Omer, muad she'idu bo shlosha pamim. Rabbi Meir disagrees. Rabbi Meir holds that halacha l'maisa, you don't need the warnings to take place on 3 separate days. Rather, even if the warnings take place on 3 days. In other words, let's say I have an ox that gored 3 times on 1 day. 3 times on one day, right? Muad she'idu bo shlosha pamim. So again, we'll say, that's the fundamental machlokes. Rabbi Yehuda telling me that in order to become a muad needs 3 separate occurrences on 3 separate days, and to become back to, and to revert back to a tam, you need again 3 provocations on 3 different days, and the shor doesn't respond. Rabbi Meir says, agrees with the 3 times, but holds the 3 times don't have to be on 3 days. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, if you have a shor that's having a bad day and gored 3 times in one day, that's a muad. That's a muad. When does it become a tam? Tam, kol shiatinokos memashmashin bo ve'eno nogeach. When does it revert back to being a tam? If kids poke the shor, right, and the shor doesn't gore them, you have to wonder about the parenting that's going on over here. You do have to wonder, right? So lamaisa, right? So again, sometimes parents are just desperate to get their kids out of the house, right? Whatever you're going to do, just keep yourself busy, right? So lamaisa, if the kids are like, cheppering the shor, and the shor doesn't do anything to them, so then halacha lamaisa again reverts back to being a tam. So we'll say, this is our fundamental machlokes in the Mishnah. So let's analyze. Says the Gemara. I both say this, of course, is a yesodistic idea because now remember, let's take a step back. The muad tam designations, what do they apply to? Only Karen. Remember again, every other form of damage, shein, regel, bar, aish, all of those things are muad from the beginning. The only time you have this distinction between muad and tam, or tam and muad, is specifically by keren, right? By damage done through irregular, aggressive behavior. Okay, so says the Gemara, my time with Rabbi Yehuda. What's Rabbi Yehuda's logic? Why does Rabbi Yehuda hold that it's not just 3 times, but it's 3 times on 3 days? Abaye says, Timol chad, mitmol trey, shulshom tlasa. So Rabbi says, Abaye really learns it out from the pasuk, right? The pasuk says, Onoda kishar nagahu mitmol shulshom v'lo yishmer shayet. So therefore, again, the Rabbi Yehuda actually just sees it in the pasuk. Timol means 1, mitmol means 2, and shilshom means 3. V'lo yishmer balav. So that shows you that again, ultimately, that Allah an animal becomes a muad after 3 occurrences. V'lo yishmer balav, and the owner still doesn't watch it. What does that show? Asan the negicha revias. That tells you that from the 4th goring and on, the animal is a muad. So I'll say what this means. Rabbi Yehuda's model is as follows. There's 2 things going on over here. So number 1, Rabbi Yehuda learning out this concept that it's 3 gorings, but it's 3 gorings on 3 different days. And he learns that from the actual verbiage of the pasuk. Now what that tells you is 3 gorings on 3 days makes the animal a muad, and now from 4th goring and on, the owner will pay nezek shalem, full damages. Good. So we'll say, so remember, this is Abaye's interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda. Rava comes along, and Rava says a little bit differently. Rava amar tmal mitmal chad, shil shom trey, v'lo yishmerenu ha'id nechayev. Now both say, Rava disagrees with Abaye on a fundamental point. I actually alluded to this a little bit earlier last week. Rava says, actually, an animal becomes a muad on the 3rd occurrence. See, remember, Abaye is explaining over here, Pasha Pshat, in the way the Mishnah is understood, is that Rabbi Yehuda is saying an animal becomes a muad when? After 3. So in other words, the muad status effectively sets in when? When does muad status set in? Well, muad status sets in, the animal becomes a muad after the 3rd goring. But that's when it becomes a muad. But the practical ramifications of being a muad is that you have to pay nezek shalem. That only occurs when? 4th goring. Rava disagrees, and Rava says no, and in fact the animal really becomes a muad after the 2nd goring, and halacha l'maisa, halacha l'ara should say differently, the animal is a muad by the 3rd goring, and therefore already again at the time of the 3rd goring, the animal is a muad and therefore pays nezek shalem. For Rabbi Meir, my taima. So what's Rabbi Meir's logic? So remember again, Rabbi Meir holds. So remember, in our Mishnah, neither Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Yehuda are disagreeing with the fact that you need 3 gorings in order to become a muad. What they're arguing about is how the 3 gorings come about. Rabbi Yehuda is saying 3 days. Rabbi Meir is saying even 3 times on 1 day. So what's Rabbi Meir's logic? Rabbi Meir says, top of Chavtal, Medal of 24a, Richek Nigichosav Chayiv. Now let's say again, if you have an animal that did do 3 acts of goring over 3 days, everyone agrees that what? The animal is a muad. Everyone agrees that the animal is a muad. So therefore, Kirev Nigichosav Lakol Shekain. So this is actually interesting logic. Rabbi Meir says, if an animal becomes a muad as a result of sustained behavior, it certainly becomes a muad as a result of successive behavior. right? In other words, one can make the argument that if it happens over 3 days, maybe they're unrelated. Masha'enkein, if 3 times occur in 1 day, that's a pretty good indicator that what? That Allah Lamaisa, this animal is an aggressive animal. So again, Rabbi, he kind of like flips it on his head. He said, if you can become muad with 3 negichos, with 3 gorings over 3 days, even though they're spread out, certainly you could become a muad with 3 gorings in 1 day. Now, both said this is important. Rabbi Meir doesn't disagree with Rabbi Huda in that he agrees an animal can become a muad over 3 days. That definitely could occur. He's just taking it a step further, that it doesn't have to be spaced out over 3 days. Rather what? It could actually even all occur on 1 day. On 1 day. So it says the Gemara Amrulay. So they said back to Rabbi Meir, Zava tochiach. We'll say, by the way, it's going to be a good week when you start with Zav, right? It's going to be right we're back. I just say, watch this. So Zava will show. Zava will show. Remember again, I will say, what's the sky? What's the with Zava? Shericha ka riyoseh Tameya. Kirva riyoseh. And I remember again, how does a Zava work? A Zava, remember this is a woman. Remember again, back in our, when did we have recently? Oh no, we smichas chaver. We're doing it in Hilchos Nida. So remember again, I will say just illustrate Zava in a very simple way. Zava, for our purposes this morning, is any woman who experiences an emission that's not menstrual in nature. So if a woman experiences, so whatever, we saw a whole machlokes Rambam and Rashi about the 7-11 cycle. I mean, we did this in Maseches Nida, right, the end of last cycle. So L'maisa, listen to this. So if a woman experiences an emission that's non-menstrual during days that she does not expect to become a Nida, that's called zivos. How does zivos work? Very quickly, if she has 1 emission, she shomeres yom keneged yom. For every day that she sees an emission, she has to observe 1 clean day. If she gets up to 3 emissions, then she has to observe what we call shiva nekiyim, 7 clean days. Now, interesting fact by Zava is if she has 3 emissions in 1 day, that essentially only counts as 1. In order for her to have to observe Shiva Nekiyim 7 clean days, by the way, just as an aside, if you'll see, our contemporary observance of Hilchos Nida is actually a blending of the halacha of Nida and Zava Gidola all into one, wrapped into one halachic construct. In any event, if she has 3 emissions on 1 day, that only counts as 1. And therefore the next day all she has to do is count 1 clean day. In order for her zivos to trigger Shiva Nekiyim, she needs 3 re'ios on 3 days. So they say to Rabbi Meir, Zava will prove that your logic is wrong. Zava tuchiach, sharicha kariyoseh tmeah. If the emissions span 3 different days, then she's tmeah shiva nekiyim. Kirva riyoseh, but if she has 3 emissions on 1 day, tahora. Then although she has to observe 1 clean day, she doesn't have to observe 7. So we'll say, so what was Rabbi Meir's whole logic? Rabbi Meir's whole logic is, if an animal could become a muad by 3 gorings over 3 days, then what? It certainly could become a muad when it does 3 gorings in 1 day. To which the Gemara says, not true. Not true. Look at Zava. Zava only becomes a Zava Gedola with 3 emissions over 3 days. But if she has 3 emissions in 1 day, ultimately again she's only Shomeres Yom Keneged Yom. She only has to observe 1 clean day. So the Gemara says, Arulahan, no, Zava's different. Hareyu Omer Zos Tiet Tumaso Bizovo. So we'll say the pasuk says this will be his tumah in his zivos. Tala kosov es hazav bereios ves hazav biyamim. Now both say this is riveting. One of the interesting distinctions between zav and zava, right? Man zav, woman zav. The difference is a zav becomes a zav enters into the highest level of tumah just based on emissions independent of days. That's what it means when it says Zav Biri'ios. Ultimately, Rashi says, Dichsev b'haikra zov tlasa zimni, uksiv tumasohi demashma b'hanach gimel havetame, uksiv zos demashma in lecha elamasha kasabo zabrius. So we'll say a Zav becomes tame through 3 emissions. Whether those emissions occur on 1 day or multiple days is irrelevant. A Zava emissions are not enough. She also needs those emissions to span over a certain course of days. So the Gemara says, "Mimai dahai vizos lemiute zava meriios." How do you know that vizos, I will say, is coming to tell you that zava can't become a zava gidol if she has 3 emissions over one day, but rather she needs days? Ema lemiute zav miyamim. Maybe it's coming to exclude zav from yamim. In other words, it's coming to tell us that a zav doesn't need emissions on multiple days, but even multiple emissions on one day make him tameh. Amrikra v'hazav es zovo l'zacha ulenekeva. The pasuk says the zav es zovo. It equates a male zav to a female zava. Makish zachar lenekeva. Manekeva biyamim av zachar biyamim. Just like in a keva, just like a zava could become tamea if the emissions span days, so to a zav, although he doesn't need that, if he has multiple emissions on multiple days, he too will become tamei. In other words, I will say, to have a meaning is, you might have thought that a zav would only become tamei if he has multiple emissions on one day. Kamash will know that the Torah equates a man to a woman, just like the woman, if she has emissions over multiple days, she becomes a zav gidola. So too, if the zav has emissions over multiple days, he also becomes tamei. V'leikish nekeva l'zachar, but why not then reverse the comparison? Compare a zava to a zav. Ma zachar b're'iyas, af nekeva b're'iyas. Just like a zav can become tamei through multiple emissions on one day, maybe a woman should be able to become a zava gedola through multiple emissions on one day as well. To which the Gemara says, Hamiyet rachmanha v'zos. Ultimately, I will say, so there the Torah excludes a zava based on the word zos. Zos is an exclusionary word. Umarois, I don't understand. I will say, how do you know what to exclude and what to include? It seems very arbitrary. So what you're telling me right now is you're including the fact that a zav, a man, can become tamei from multiple re'iyos over multiple days, right? But it can also become tamei through multiple re'iyos over one day. But a woman can only become tamei from multiple re'iyos, multiple emissions spanned over multiple days, but cannot become tamei from multiple emissions on one day. Why? Based on the word vizos. Vizos excludes a woman from becoming tamei through multiple emissions on one day. How do you know that? How do you know? The Gemara says, Ma rois. The Gemara says, Mistabra, kai b'ri'iyos b'ma'it ri'os. Because also the pasuk itself is talking about emissions. So it makes sense that the pasuk that talks about emissions excludes emissions. Kai b'ri'iyos b'ma'it ri'os. So both say the pasuk is talking about the fact that a zav can become tamei through multiple emissions on one day. The word vizos is an exclusionary phrase or exclusionary word. And what is it coming to exclude? A woman. That a woman cannot become, a zava cannot become tamei from multiple emissions on one day. Rather, for her to become tamei, she has to have multiple emissions over multiple days. Incredible. All right, Rabbi say. So now, again, what are we left with? You're like, I don't know. I'm really not sure. At least the pastries were good. Right? So now remember, here's what we have. Just keep focused. Right? What we have is a machlokes Rabbi and Rabbi Huda. That's what we're doing over here, right? In other words, we're getting into definitions. What's a tam? What's a muad? What's a tam? What's a muad? Right? So I will say ultimately again a tam. So a muad, the Gemara is defining machlokes Rabbi and Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Huda is saying 3 times 3 days. 3 times 3 days. Rabbi Meir, even, right? He certainly agrees if it's 3 times 3 days, yes, it becomes a muad. But even 3 times 1 day. 3 times 1 day. We just say, Rabbi Huda, where do you get your respective positions from? Rabbi Huda gets it from the pasuk, the wording of the pasuk itself. Rabbi Meir seems to make a kal v'chomer to zava, right? I'm sorry. Rabbi Meir seems to make just an inherent kal v'chomer. If sustained behavior makes you into a muad, then what? Certainly concentrated behavior makes you into a muad. And I'll say all the Gemara was just doing was poking a hole in that logic from Zava, and that led into this whole discussion about Zivas. Okay, so we're still again locked in this machlokes. So it's on Rabbanon. Let's here we go. Eizuhu muad. What's a muad? Kol she'idu bo shlosha yamim. Any animal, I will say, any animal that was warned 3 times. Right now, if you notice, I will say the lashon over here is shlosha yamim. Not what? Not shlosha pamim, not 3 times, 3 days. I will say, who is that like? Who is that like? That's like Rabbi Huda, right? So Ezu hu muad kol she'idu bo shlosh yamim. V'tam, we'll say, what's tam? Shiwa tinokos memash mishin bo ve'ino nogeach div Rabbi Yossi. And a tam, we'll say, is any animal, again, we'll say, any animal that is prodded or shepherded by children and does not gore them. That's the words Rabbi Yossi. Now, we'll say, I just understand what that means. Just how do these things work in Kasher? Now, remember, we'll say, you see a stam animal on the street, right? Animal. What's the status of that animal? Status of that animal? Tam. In other words, you're tam until you become a muad. So we'll say, obviously, when we say what is a tam, what that really means is, if an animal was a muad, how does it revert back to being a tam? Right? How do you become a Baal Tshuva if you're a shar? How do you revert back to your original status of being a dam? To which the Gemara says, if you are prodded and shepherded and you have opportunity to exhibit aggressive behavior, but you don't do so, so that halacha l'maisa reverts you back to the status that was. By that, I just want to point out, all kidding aside, if you notice, this is the exact model of tshuva. Right? The Rambam says, remember, Rambam in Parak Aleph, and the Rambam in Parak Gimel have two different definitions of tshuva. In Parak Aleph, in Hilchos Tshuva, the Rambam discusses the mechanics of tshuva. What do you need in order to do tshuva? So you have to have akaras acheta, recognition of the sin. You have to have, again, charata, remorse. And you have to have kabbalah ala asid, a promise not to do it again. But then in Parak Gimel, when the Rambam says, Ezuhu bal tshuva gimura, what is a true bal tshuva? What is a true bal tshuva? What does the Gemara say? It's someone who is placed in the same exact situation in which I sinned previously, but now I don't sin again. They will say that is the epitome of tshuva. You see, I can go through procedural tshuva, which a lot of us do, right? I make a mistake, and then I go through the steps of spiritual rehabilitation, like we just outlined before. I recognize what I did wrong, I have remorse about what I did, I do tshuva, I do vidui, right? Confession, right? Kabbalah, also I promise to do better in the future. But again, when do you really become about tshuva? When your resolve to that tshuva process is tested. When you are placed in the same exact situation, and this time you make a different decision, that's about tshuva. So I both say it's incredible. In this model, it's the same idea. How do you know when an animal really becomes a tam? So in the past, this same animal, when it would be shepherded, right, when it would be challenged, when it would be annoyed, what would it do? It would gore. So now the kids are hanging off its horns, right? They're going ahead and shepherding or doing whatever to it, and the animal doesn't do it. Sure, you're literally placed in the same exact situation, and beforehand, you would have been goring like nobody's business, and now you restrain yourself. That's tshuva. That's when the animal ultimately again returns back to being a tam. Dear Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon says, Muad, kol she'id bo shlosh pamim. Shlosh pamim. Rabbi Shimon says, what's a muad? Anytime the animal was warned 3 times. So we'll say, so if you notice again, Rabbi Yossi is going like who? Rabbi Meir. Right? And Rabbi Yossi is saying ultimately, again, it's not days, but rather it's times. Kol she'id pamim. V'lo amru shlosh yamim ela lechazara bilvad. Oh, so this is interesting, and I will say it's a little bit of a hybrid over here. Rabbi Yossi says that in order for an animal, I'm sorry, Rabbi Shimon, thank you. Rabbi Shimon says, "V'lo amru shel sheyamim ela lechazara bilvad." So Rabbi says, so this is actually very interesting. So Rabbi Shimon comes along and says, in order to become a muad, 3 occurrences. Doesn't matter if the occurrences occur on 3 days or 1 day or 2 days. It makes no difference. 3 occurrences. So where do days play a role? Days play a role in your restoration to tam status. Look at Rashi. We'll say El Chazara Shem Chazar LaAchar Hadaso Shlosh Yamim Sheroa Shvarim V'Lo Nagach Chozla Tamuso. This is incredible. Shimon says, if the shar, after having been a muad, encountered other shvarim, encountered other oxen, and played nicely in the sandbox, right? Did not gore any oxen for 3 days. And I both say, now remember, the only time it makes a difference that they didn't gore for 3 days is when they had the opportunity to gore, right? If they encountered other oxen and didn't gore for 3 days, then they returned back to their tam status. So Rabbi Shimon, interestingly enough, Rabbi say, is a little bit of like a hybrid model. Amrav Nachman, Amrav Ada Barava, halacha Rabbi Yehuda b'muad. The halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda b'muad, namely that in order for an animal to become a muad, what has to happen? 3 days. 3 days, not 3 occurrences, 3 days. Shai Rabbi Yossi modelo, because Rabbi Yossi agreed with Rabbi Yehuda. Halacha Rabbi Meir b'tam, and the halacha is like Rabbi Meir by tam, that ultimately again, that an animal reverts back to its tam status when the kids chepper it and it doesn't do anything. Why? Shar Rabbi Yossi modelo. Ultimately, again, because Rabbi Yossi agrees with him. Amrli Rav Nachman. Rav says Rav Nachman, I don't understand. B'lei mamar halach Rabbi Meir b'muad. So why don't you just say the halacha follows Rabbi Meir by muad? After all, Shar Rabbi Shimon modelo, because Rabbi Shimon agrees with him. V'halach Rabbi Huda b'tam Shar Rabbi Shimon modelo. And the halacha Rabbi Huda by tam, because Rabbi Shimon agrees with him. Amrli anek Rabbi Yossi svirle. I hold the Rabbi Yossi. Why do I hold the Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi say Rabbi Yossi nimuko imo. So we'll say. So remember again, this is a quotation. We had this in Gittin. Rabbi Yossi, the halacha almost always follows Rabbi Yossi. Why? Because whenever Rabbi Yossi weighs in nimuko imo, Rashi, tamav v'ra'ayos of imo. Whenever Rabbi Yossi espoused an opinion, he was always able to back up that opinion with reliable sources. That's Lashon of Rashi. Tamav, his reasoning, v'ra'ayos and his proofs, imo, were always with him. But it's a very profound idea. You know, a lot of times in life, people espouse opinions and ideologies that are ill-informed. I remember last week, I don't remember what it was. But somebody was interviewing one of these college students who was rallying, for a pro-Palestinian rally. And he went over to this young woman who, of course, they all wear masks. It's incredible. It's such cowardice. It's such cowardice. And if you believe in something, show your face. If you don't want to show your face, it means you're a zero. You're nothing. I say, so it's interesting. So he asked this young woman, tell me, you're chanting from the river to the sea. Palestine, just out of curiosity, which river and sea are you referring to? Just want to know. And it was the most incredible thing to see. Obviously, she has no idea what she's talking about. But she got combative. You know why are you asking me? You see, in life, if you want to rally for a cause, okay, go ahead, rally for a cause, whatever. If you believe in it, we all are entitled to have our respective beliefs. But whatever you're going to believe in, make sure you can back it up. Whatever you're going to espouse, make sure that it's rooted in something real. If you are going to promote something, then make sure you are truly able to stand behind it. The halacha follows Rabbi Yossi. You know why? Because Rabbi Yossi never rolled in and just started, espousing opinions. Rather, whatever he would say, he would be able to go ahead and back up with concrete proofs and concrete information. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "Ibailu shloshi yam." So let's analyze this. So now let's pause here for just a second. Let's pause here. So how do we paskin? Because now we're going to get into something else in just a moment. So how do we paskin? We'll say because this is like a yesodistic idea. What is a muad? So the Rambam in Hilchos Niskei Mammon, Perek Vav Halacha Aleph says as follows: Ezehu muad. Now we'll say, what is a muad? Here it is. What's the definition? Is it Rabbi Huda 3 days? Is it Rabbi Meir 3 times? Here we go. Kol she'idu bo shlosha yamim. We pass like Rabbi Huda. Then in order to become a muad, ultimately again has to be 3 occurrences on 3 days. Avol, im nagach b'yom echad, o nashach, o ravaz, o ba'at, o nagaf, afilu mei pamim, ein ze muad. And I will say, but halacha l'maisa, if the animal kicks, bites, gores 3 times in 1 day, it's not a muad. It's not a muad. We'll say it's not a muad. We'll say there's a tremendous Musar Haskell in this. What's the tremendous Musar Haskell? See, you just said it. Everyone has a bad day. Everyone has a bad day. I will say there are times in life where I say things, I do things. I will say, sometimes you could verbally gore a person also, right? And sometimes you could behave in ways that are just so profoundly destructive. Everybody has an off day. And this is incredibly important. But having an off day doesn't make me a muad. Having an off day doesn't mean that this is who I am. Having an off day just means we're human beings. And I'll say this is such a important thing in relationships and how we judge others. Sometimes you see someone and they do something terrible, and often what we do is based on that terrible thing, we kind of paint this entire picture of their personality. It's important to understand that Allah is telling us people sometimes are off. They're off their game. They're having a bad day. Relationships in marriage, with children, with parents, people have low points. But don't judge people based on those low points. Don't create almost like a character picture based on those low points. You only become a muad after sustained behavior. Okay, you act a certain way over a sustained amount of time, then yes, that is who you are. Then you are a muad. But sometimes Rabbi say, unfortunately, we just do things that we're not proud of in a one-off situation, even if it's multiple times on that one day. But that doesn't create a true picture of who and what we are. It's important to always understand sometimes we have a bad day. Just like we know for ourselves that we have a bad day, we have to be dan lekaf sechus and give others a little bit of latitude and a little bit of space to have their bad days as well. Incredible. Let's go back there. Says the Gemara, Bailuhu. Gemara asks the Shai, Bailuhu, Shloshi Yamim. Diktani. We'll say these 3 days that we mentioned, Liyaudi Tura or Liyaudi Gavra. So this is very interesting, I will say. Ultimately, again, is it to warn the ox or is it to warn the master? I'll say, isn't that interesting? So in other words, obviously from the liability perspective, it's the master is obligated. But the shayla is when we talk about the warning, right? A muad is someone who is like in other words, they're warned, they're said. Who is the warning for? Right? In other words, who is this directed to? Is it directed to the ox or is it directed to the owner? So the Gemara says, Rashi, look at Rashi this moment. Liudi Tura, ulemuute heicha dinagach biyom echad, or liudi gavra liyada ba'ala sharba in shloshim. So let's analyze this. So the Gemara says, Ibailu shloshim diktani liudi Tura liudi gavra. L'maynaf kamina. So what does it matter? Here's why it matters. The asu tlasa kite sahadi b'chad yoma. Well, say imagine by the way, 3 sets of witnesses show up on one day. Right? 3 sets of witnesses. Right? 3 groups, A, B, and C, all show up on the same day. I will say, obviously, each of them witnessed a separate act of goring. So what's the halacha? So udetura miyad. So if at the end of the day we say that it's to go ahead and warn the ox, so to speak, then that works. Then 3 witnesses on one day works because now the ox is designated as a muad. The amritli ude gavra, I will say, but if it's about warning the owner, then lo miyad, then that shouldn't work. Why? Meima amr hashtohu dekamasadubi. I will say, listen to this. The owner of the ox could say, listen, the way this is supposed to work is how? You're supposed to, right? Somebody's supposed to tell me that my ox is goring. That gives me time to increase my shmira, my guarding of my ox. All 3 of you guys showed up in one day. It is unfair to label my ox as a muad when what? When I've just found out for the first time today what my ox is. I will say, you know what it's like? You know, it's if you've ever had a child who received a failing grade in school, right? And again, if the teacher did not do their job in communicating to you over the course, why didn't you tell me? Right? My kid didn't do well. I'm sorry my kid didn't do well. My kid misbehaved. Tell me, communicate, right? Without communication, I can't know what's going on. So the owner of the shar says, look, all 3 of you guys, 1 through 3 are showing up on the same exact day. So Lamaisa, how was I supposed to take precautionary measures when no one ever told me anything? I will say, this is also an incredible, so much impact into this Gemara. In life, you only know what you know. In other words, let's say, and this is so important also, sometimes people who we love are doing things that are detrimental and negative and destructive. And we think that they should figure it out on their own what it is that they're doing. Sometimes people have to be told what they're doing is wrong and the corrective steps they need to take. But if you don't share it with them, they'll never know. People only know what they know. So the Baal Ashar says, I'm happy you guys showed up, but don't make me a muad today. I just found out for the first time. So that's nafkamino. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Ultimately, again, who is the ha'ada? Who is the muad status for? So Tashma, this is actually interesting. Ein hashar na'asa muad asher iduba b'fnei baal b'fnei bezdin. I will say in general, a shar can only become a muad if the witnesses testify in the presence of bezdin and in the presence, ultimately, again, of the owner of the shar. He'idu ba b'fnei bezdin. If ultimately, again, they went ahead and they testified in front of bezdin, the witnesses, v'shlo b'fnei baalim, but the owner wasn't there, or b'fnei baalim v'shlo b'fnei bezdin, or in front of the owner, but not in front of the Beis Din. Eno nasa muad ad she'idu ba b'fnei Beis Din b'fnei baalim. So we'll say that's halacha. That's halacha. You can only go ahead and make an animal a muad if both the owner and the Beis Din are present. Ushnayim. So the Gemara says as follows: Heiduo shnayim b'rishona. So we'll say, so okay, let's take a case. There are 3 different sets of witnesses. Set 1, right? First group testified about the first goring. Second set testified about the second goring. Third set testified about the third goring. So we'll say, what's the halacha? So harikan shalosh edios. So we'll say, ultimately, again, they are considered to be three different groups. So on one hand, they're looked at as three independent groups of witnesses. In other words, they're not looked at as one cohesive group. However, vein edus achos lahazama. So we'll say this is very interesting. So on one hand, they're considered to be three separate groups. I will say, what does that mean? So Rashi points out over here, concept from Makkas. In general, you have a concept that when you have a testimonial unit, edus shabat lamiktsasa batla kula. When you go ahead and invalidate one part of the testimonial unit, the entire unit is void. So on one hand, these three groups of witnesses are all considered to be separate and distinct. On the other hand, they are like a shtickle group. Why? Why? Because their combined testimony does what? Their combined testimony goes ahead and makes the animal a muad. Right? You hear this distinction? On one hand, they're independent testimonial units. On the other hand, they have combined testimony that is incredibly relevant for the muad status of the animal. So the Gemara says, "Ve'hein eidos achos la'azama." Therefore, we'll say for hazama purposes, they are considered. Remember, hazama is the reciprocal punishment that false witnesses get. For hazama, they are considered to be one testimonial unit. What does this mean? For example, nimseis kat rishona zomemes. So we'll say, let's say the first set of witnesses are found to be eidim zomim. We'll say, remember again, a lot going on in the staff today. How do you become an eid zomim? How do you become an eid zomim? Right? Reuven and Shimon show up and they say, we saw Levi kill Yehuda. I will say, what happens? What happens? How do they become Zomim? Someone else comes along and says, another set of witnesses says to Reuven and Shimon, maybe, who killed who? Maybe Levi did kill Yehuda. Maybe he did. Right? But Lamaisa, you for sure didn't see it. Why not? Imanu hayusim, you were with us. That's what it means. In other words, we'll say Eidim Zomin are Eidim who are discredited, not because the event didn't occur, right? But because the witnesses could not have seen what they claimed to have seen, because they were not at the site of the event when the supposed event occurred. So watch this. So in this case, we'll remember again. So now let's say set number one of witnesses become Eidim Zomin. They could not have seen Reuven's shar, Gor Shimon's shar. So what happens? Hare kanchte edios. So fine. So group 1 is removed, but there's still groups 2 and 3 are still intact. Right? What's halacha? So hare kanchte edios. V'hu pater v'heim paturin. So ultimately they're going to both say, so the owner of the ox is pater. And what that means, pater, is he doesn't have to pay nezek shalom, complete damages. He's still chayiv chatzi nezek, because this is still a case of keren tam. V'heim paturin nimtzeis kachnia mizomemes. If the second set of witnesses are found to be Eidim Zomin, so we'll say, so therefore set number 2 is taken off. So Hare Kan Eidus Achos, still group number 1 is still left. V'hu Pater, so the owner of the ox still is Pater. In other words, he still has to only pay half Nezek, because it's Keren Tam. Vein Peturin, and the witness is also Pater. Ninseis Kachlishes Zomemes. I will say now, what happens if Halacha Lamaisa, the third set of witnesses were found to be Eidim Zomin, then what? Kulan Chayavin. This is fascinating. We'll say, then, not getting into the mechanics of this now, but now we'll say all 3 of those groups now are looked at 1 unit for Eidim Zomin, and what do they have to pay? They have to pay back to Reuven Nezek Shalim. They have to pay back to Reuven the complete damages that they were trying to make him pay, ultimately again by making his animal a muad. Fascinating. And I will say that's the reciprocal punishment of the Eidim Zomin. So I will say it's fascinating, right? In other words, so on one hand, we look at them as separate testimonial units. Therefore, when one of them is made into a zomin, the other 2 are still intact. But once all of them have been made Eidim Zomin, then what I will say, we combine them for punishment for punitive purposes as one testimonial unit. And they have to pay nezek shalim, complete damages to Reuven, the owner of the ox, because that's what they wanted to get him to do. Incredible. So the Gemara says, if you say that ultimately, again, when we make an animal a muad, who are we making a muad? The ox. Then this case makes sense. Amud Beis, Ella I amrit li ude gavra. But I will say, if it's about making, right? So in other words, if we say that the warning, right, the testimonial warning is for the ox, not for the owner, then these cases make sense. However, if halacha l'maisa, we're talking about that the warning itself, right? The warning itself is there to make the owner a muad. Then the witness could say lemru hanach kamai. Anan mihavi adinan de basar shloshi yomi asu hanim miadiluhu. So the first set of witnesses could say, listen, we showed up on day 1. We had no idea who was coming on day 2 or day 3. So why should we be wrapped up with them? Why should we wrap? Because we'll say, remember again, if you hold that the warning, right, that the warning is to make the animal a muad, then Rabbi say, remember again, this could be a case of all 3 witnesses showing up on the same day. Actually, the last words in Rashi and Amud Aleph are ubahadi hadadi asu, right? Then it makes sense that all 3 of these witnesses are showing up. All 3 of these testimonial units are showing up on the same exact day, and they're all testifying. One is testifying about goring 1, second goring 2, second goring 3. Then Rabbi says, they're all showing up on the same day, and then once they're all proven to be zomim, then what? Then we could slap them with nezek shalim, figuratively, monetarily. Right? Slap them with nezek shalim penalty. Rabbi say, but if the witnesses are showing up on 3 separate days, which would have to be occurring if making a muad is making the owner muad, because it's not fair, you can't make the owner muad on one day. So if the witnesses are showing up on 3 consecutive days, then how can you make them one cohesive unit for azama purposes? The first set could say, listen, we showed up on Sunday, we had no idea who was showing up on Monday or Tuesday, so how can you lump us together with them? Third line about say, 24b. Amar Rav Ashi, Amrisi l'shmaite kamed Rav Kahana. I said this over before Rav Kahana, right? Ultimately, va'amru li uli udi tura minecha. Does this even work to even make the ox? So to what? After all, leimru hanach basrai anan minayadinan dechol kikai beidina lasude betura kaasu anlechi gavra palganis kasinan. So again, I must say, even if you hold it all showing up on the same day, when you walk into court, right, and there are people assembled in Beis Din, you don't know why other people are there. So the first set of witnesses could say, listen, we were just showing up because we saw Ruvain's shor, Gor, Shimon's shor. And as far as we were concerned, all we were coming to do was to make Ruvain chayiv in half damages. In half damages, we didn't know that all in the same Beis Din was a second set of witnesses and a third set of witnesses, and that combined we would make them. Well, we had no idea. To which the Gemara says, what's the case? The Kamaramzi Ramuzi. So the case is where we see these 3 units in Beis Din, and what are they doing? They're gesturing to each other. So in other words, we see there's some type of collusion going on. Rav Ashi Amar Kishabar Ritzufim, where they came into Beis Din one after the other. Ravina Amar B'makirin Balashar Ve'ena Makirin Asashar. Ravina says it's a case of where they know the owner of the ox, but they can't recognize which ox it is. You can't recognize which ox it is. If you don't know which ox it is, so how can you make it muad? Where they want to say to Reuven, the owner of the ox, listen, we can't identify which ox, but we know it's one of your oxen. You better establish heightened guarding protocols for your entire, not flock, herd, for your entire herd. Okay, so we'll say good. So let's pause here. So we'll say, so what's halacha? What's halacha? So when we warn, when ultimately again, when we are going ahead and giving this warning, the Shlosha Yamim, is it to go ahead and warn the ox or warn the owner? So Rabbi say we see based on the Rambam, you're really warning the owner. Because again, remember, Rabbi say if it was about warning the ox, then what? You should be able to establish a muad status even when 3 times in one day. The fact that you need 3 days indicates to us that Allah Lamaisa, the muad warn, right? The warnings are not for the ox, the warnings are for the owner, so that the owner after hearing that his ox gored the first time, then what? He could take the necessary precautions to ensure that this ox doesn't gore anymore. So really again, the warnings themselves are directed ultimately again towards the owner, and therefore the Rambam Paskins again it's Shlosh Yamim, 3 separate days. Incredible. Let's go right. There's a lot more. Okay, let's go a little bit. There's a lot more to say on this, but let's go back. It says the Gemara. We actually had this case a little bit yesterday, and we're going to delve a little bit more into it. Hamishase kalbo shachavero bechavero. So now watch this. I go ahead and I incite my friend's dog. Right? So again, Reuven has a dog. I go ahead and I incite the dog, and then the dog goes and bites someone. Right? So Reuven's dog goes and injures Shimon. Right? So Shabbos says, so now, Mahu, what's the halacha? Mishasa vaday pater. Shabbos say the Mishasa, the inciter is pater. Shabbos say, now why is the inciter pater? Grama ben Ezekin. This was yesterday's daf. Shabbos remember again in halacha, causation is pater. right? So if you go ahead and you incite the dog and the dog bites someone else, you are pater. Bal kelev mai. We'll say, what about the owner of the dog? What about the owner of the dog? So miyar minan matzi amrle ana maya vidnale. So on one hand, maybe the owner of the dog can say, "Listen, what do you want from me? I didn't do anything, right? Someone else incited my dog. It's not my fault." Ol dilma minale kevan diadata bekalbecha the mishasile umishasi loi baila chalishtaye. Or you could say, "Listen, you know that you have an excitable dog, right? So since you have an excitable dog, why do you have such an animal in your possession?" Right, incredible. Who would have thunk it, right? Yeah, it's an animal and it's excitable. And the animal only bites when you get too close to it. What does that mean? What does that mean? Animal only bites when you get too close to it. People generally get close to one another, right? So if the animal bites when it gets close to it, the pashtos don't have a mazik in your rishos. So I'll say, so that's the shaila. So who is chayiv over here? The inciter, or ultimately again, the owner of the dog. Amar Rabbi Zera, Tashma, Vitam. So we'll say, let's go back. So the Gemara actually tries to resolve this from the. By the way, I just want to point out, I get varied feedback on my dog comments, but I just want to go on record as thanking Dr. Julie Blumenfeld for reaching out to me personally, telling me that she's very supportive of my dog stances. So I just want to, again, she's been the lone voice. It's a little bit lonely. It's a little bit lonely on this perch upon which I sit, but I do want to thank Dr. Blumenfeld for her support. Someone says as follows: Amar Rabbi Zera, Tashma v'tam shehu atinokos memash b'shimo. So I'll say. So remember again. So the Mishnah said as follows. So let's go back. Remember again, we'll say about the Mishnah. So we had a discussion about how does an animal revert back to its tam status. In other words, after the animal ultimately is established as a tam, how does the animal become a muad again? So the Gemara answered, when the children are chappering it and it doesn't gore. So in other words, when it's being bothered, but it doesn't respond, ultimately again, that's called a tam. If we have time, I want to come back and highlight one piece about that. So Gemara says, what's the halacha? Hanogeach chayiv. Now I will say, what you see over here is that halacha l'maisa, what if that ox were to chas v'shalom gore one of those children? So what do you see? That ultimately, again, the owner of the ox would be chayiv. Now I will say, now what is that a case of? That's a case of mishasa. Right, that's a case of inciting. Remember again, I will say, the kids are bothering the ox, right? They're bothering the ox. And yet you see that even though they're bothering the ox, the owner of the ox is chayiv. So you see from here that mishasas akelev, when you incite a dog, the owner of the dog is chayiv for those damages. Amar Abaye said, well, maybe not. Mikatani naga chayiv. Ultimately, again, does it say that if it gored, you'd be chayiv? Dilma hanagach lo havitam. Maybe if the animal gored, ultimately, again, the owner wouldn't be chayiv because halacha l'maisa, again, it wasn't cited, but rather it's just saying it's not a tam. So obviously, if it's goring, it's not a tam. But maybe the owner would not be chayiv. But maybe again, since someone else was inciting the animal, maybe the owner of the animal is not chayiv. So let's analyze a bit more. Tashma, shisa b'asa kalev, shisa bo nachash. If you incite the dog or you incite the snake, pater. Ultimately, again, you're pater. My love. So we'll say, what does that mean? My love, pater mishasa v'chay bal kelev. Doesn't that mean that the inciter is chayiv? I'm sorry, the inciter is pater, but the owner of the animal is chayiv. So lo ema pater af mishasa. No, maybe it means like this. Maybe not only is the owner of the dog or the owner of the snake pater because they didn't do anything, but even the inciter is pater. Amarava, imtim tzilomar mishasa kabu shechavira bechaveira chayiv. So we'll say. So Rava says like this. Now we'll say. Now in general, the Gemara says we're going to talk about this. Let's say you want to take the approach. See, it's interesting. I will say the Gemara seems to take it for granted that the inciter is always pater. Now, why is that? Now, again, we'll see halacha l'maisa whether or not that's true. But why does the Gemara take it for granted that the inciter will be pater? Why? Because grama benezikin is causation. It's causation. I'm not doing anything. Or the act of inciting is not a maisa. So the Gemara is like this. This is incredible. Even if you want to say that if I go over to Reuven's dog and I incite it and it bites Shimon, that I, the inciter, for sure am pater. Let's accept that premise for a moment. Whether that's halacha maisa, we'll see. Listen to this. I'm sorry. I will say, if ultimately again, if halacha l'maisa, even sorry, I was just saying it wrong. If we accept the premise that when you incite the dog to go ahead and hurt someone else, let's say you are chayiv, shisohu ba'atzmo pater. So I will say this is interesting. If ultimately again, listen to this, shisohu ba'atzmo. If ultimately, I will say, if I go ahead and, I'm sorry. Let me say this once more. Let me be clear. Even if you accept the premise that I'm a shasa kalbo shechaveiro bechaveiro chayiv, that if I incite the dog of Ruvain and the dog of Ruvain bites Shimon, that Ruvain, the owner of the dog, is chayiv. Okay? Because remember, the Gemara is accepting it as a fact that the mishasa, the inciter, is pater because it's grama. So let's say now we accept the premise that the owner of the dog is chayiv. Watch this case, Rabosai. Shiso ba'asma. Let's say I incite Ruvain's dog, and the dog bites me. The dog bites me, pater. In that case, everyone agrees that what? Ruvain will be pater. Why? My timer. Also, we actually had this concept before. Because the general Bosai, when you engage in behavior that is an aberration from the norm, and as a result, you are damaged as a result of your behavior, you are not entitled to receive any kind of damages. Rabbi say, where do we see this? We had this before. Where do we have this? If you have two cows in Rosh Hashanah, one of them is squatting. In other words, it's standing in place. It's squatting, standing in place, and the other one ultimately again is walking. And ultimately, so remember, an animal squatting in Rosh Hashanah, that is an aberration. That is abnormal behavior. Animals don't squat, they move in Rosh Hashanah. So now one of the animals squatted, one of the animals is walking. And what happened? And the walking animal kicks the squatting animal, pitura. Ultimately, again, the kicking animal, the aggressor, is pater. Revutza b'ma'alachas. But we'll say now, why is the kicker pater? Why? Because we'll say, remember again, this is the concept. Kala mashana. If you engage in behavior that is an aberration from the norm, and as a result of your aberration behavior, you are injured, you're not entitled to damages. So because the owner ultimately, again, of the cow that's squatting, that's abnormal. So because that's abnormal, if you get damaged because of something abnormal you did, you're not entitled to damages. On the other hand, the Gemara says, if the squatting animal goes ahead and kicks the walking animal, then ultimately, again, there is chiyuv, then chayeves. Why chayeves, Rabbi say? Why chayeves? Because that's keren tam. That's keren tam. So Rabbi Shmuel wants to suggest that if I incite the dog, which is a shina, which is an aberration of behavior, and the dog bites me, sorry, you can't get any damages for that because ultimately, again, you engaged in mishunadika behavior. You engaged in a different kind of behavior, therefore, ultimately, again, you're not liable to damages. Amar Leisi responded, the truth is, ano bahi chiv mechayavna. The truth is, he responded, the truth is, in that case of the squatting animal, I still hold that the kicker is going to be chayiv. Why? What do you have rishus to do? You have rishus to trample on me. But to kick me, ultimately, again, you have no rishus. So Rabbi says, so just interesting. Rabbi says, so halacha l'maisa. We're going to get to the Meshasa case tomorrow, but I just want to point out, how do we pass in terms of tam? We've established how we pass in terms of muad. How do we pass in terms of tam? So Rabbi says, so listen to this. Here's the halacha. Behema shehuada, the chazra ba. So we'll say, if you have an animal that is a muad, this is Ramam Hilchos Niskei Mammon Halacha Zayin. So we've already established, in order to become a muad, 3 times, 3 days. How do you go back to being a tam after you've been a muad? Sharshua ligach v'chazar shaligach afapishu nogef ha'izkume emasayu chazaraso adshua tinokos memashmishin bo ve'enu nogeach. So we'll say, so literally the Rambam adopts the position actually of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, right? That ultimately, again, how do you become a tam? If literally, again, you're shepherd, kids are hanging off your horns, right? Or bothering you, or poking you, and you don't respond, ultimately, again, you've reverted back to being a tam. Rabbi say, just end off, there's a tremendous Musar Haskel in that as well, which is, Rabbi say, what are we asking? How do you become a tam? Rabbi say, now remember, a tam, what does it mean to be a tam? Who was a tam? Yaakov ish tam Yoshev Oalim. He'll say, to be a tam, you see, sometimes we think about the tam, like by the Arba Banim, by the four sons, by the Haggadah. He'll say, so sometimes to be a tam, we look at it as like a negative thing. But Torah calls Yaakov, ish tam yoshev ohalim. So he'll say, we aspire to be a tam. How do you become a tam? He'll say, and remember again, tam also means like tamimos, like a complete individual. It doesn't mean simple, it means complete. How do you become a complete individual? Well, so you know what the secret to completion is? One of the pieces is to prevent yourself from being easily provoked. It is so easy to be drawn into machlokas. It is so easy to be drawn into negativity, right? This one pokes you. This one prods you. This one's hanging off your horn. You don't like what this one said. You don't like what this stream said. You don't like what this Rosh Hashiva said. You don't like this. You don't like that. It's so easy to be provoked. It's so easy to be drawn into machlokas. It's so easy to go ahead and say, okay, let's go. Let's gore. But what does it mean to be a tam? What does it mean to be a Yaakov? Ish tam yoshev olim. It means, like the Mishnah says, it means to be the kind of person. My time's up. It means to be the kind of person. It means to be the kind of person, Avosai, who even when provoked, and even when something is done that you don't like, or something is said that you don't like, you exercise the muscle of self-restraint, and you hold yourself together. Because you realize that Achdus is more important than advancing your agenda, and being B'Shalom so much more important than getting your point across. To be a Tam ultimately means to know the art of self-restraint, and even when poked, and even when prodded, and even when provoked, at the end of the day, you hold it together. And I will say, this is what we start to another week of incredible things for Klal Yisrael. We begin to see the trickle of the hostages coming out of Eretz Yisrael. Like Alan mentioned before, we dedicate our learning every single morning to Master Sergeant Yomi who died al Kiddush Hashem, protecting the Jews of Sderot. Jews have died al Kiddush Hashem. We need our Shvuyim to come home, and we have to do our part as well. And if we could exercise, if we could aspire to become that Tam, that Yaakov, each Tam Yoshev Olim. How? Because even Achu Tinokos Mashmashinbo, to refrain from machlokas, to devote all of our energies to achdus, even when at the end of the day we are provoked by things we find as upsetting, as offensive. That's the greatest zechus right now, to keep Klal Yisrael together, that we could provide for our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. So it should be a week of Aliyah, a week of Besaros Tovos, a week of reunification of families, and Halavai, a week of success, victory, and Geula for Klal Yisrael. Amen. All right, Chavran Zoom, have a great day, everyone.